we're going to segue to our keynote speakers, Dr. Darity and Dr. Kirsten Mullen. They're going to speak for 30 minutes and do a 15-minute Q&A. So we have them here. So let's bring them up.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear us now?
Yeah, good afternoon. Happy Father's Day. Happy Juneteenth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me say first, while I am an independent scholar, I'm not a PhD. But shall we just jump in with the presentation?
He's on mute. No, he's on mute.
All right. So I will start.
Go ahead.
All right. Okay. So we would like to begin by defining what we mean by reparations, so we can all, start with a shared understanding of what we believe is possible. We define reparations as a program of acknowledgement, redress, and closure for a grievous injustice. The reparations claim we want to focus on here today is not solely based upon slavery. People talk about slavery reparations, but we're not talking solely about slavery reparations. Rather, we are talking about the full scope of American history. Slavery, yes, the fiery crucible from which white supremacy emanated, but also nearly 100 years of legal segregation and white terror campaigns, more commonly known as Jim Crow. And finally, the present moment, dating from the passage of the civil rights legislation in the mid to late 1960s, that's marked by ongoing violence, police violence against unarmed Black women and men, mass incarceration, discrimination in housing, in the workplace and education, and the stigmatization that accompanies these atrocities. The acronym ARC. By acknowledgement, we mean the perpetrators of these harms admit their involvement and, importantly, admit that they have benefited from these actions. For Black Americans, this means not just a receipt of an apology, but the recognition that the commitment for redress, the R of ARC, is coming from the American people as a whole. So this is, coming from the American people, but it's coming through the American people through the actions of the federal government. So the goal of redress or restitution is to move the descendants of U.S. slavery to an equitable position commensurate with the status they would have attained had these injustices not occurred over the previous 150 years. For African Americans, restitution would eliminate racial disparities in wealth. That is the primary objective from our point of view. We're going to talk a little bit later about the racial wealth gap in some detail. But restitution also would eradicate disparities in income, disparities in education, health, sentencing and incarceration, and political participation. But the goal would be, to put Blacks in a better position to engage in American political and social life. And then lastly, closure, the C of ARC, which involves the mutual conciliation between African Americans and the beneficiaries of slavery, like legal segregation and white terror campaigns, and ongoing discrimination towards Blacks. This would require good faith and a determination to own the actions of the past, to confront the present, and vow to act differently, to act equitably going forward. Once the reparations program is executed and racial inequality is eliminated, Blacks would make no further race-based claims against the American government on the assumption that no new race-specific claims are inflicted upon them and that the old harms are not revived. Black American descendants of U.S. slavery constitute about 12% of the nation's population, yet they possess less than 2% of the nation's wealth. According to the 2019 Survey of Consumer Finance, the average Black household has a net worth of $841,900 lower than the average white household. Raising the Black share of wealth up to the Black share of the nation's population would require an expenditure of at least $14 trillion.
For us, the foundation of a reparations program rests on 4 essential pillars, all of which should be included in an effective bill for redress. First, eligible recipients must be individuals who can meet a lineage standard as well as an identity standard. Claimants must be able to trace their ancestry to a person who was enslaved in the United States. This is the community to whose ancestors the federal government promised and then denied 40-acre land grants, a valuable asset that would have gone a long way toward compensating them for generations of unpaid wages, of harsh treatment, of murder, and putting them squarely on the road to full citizenship. A government agency run by professionally trained genealogists should be set up to assist potential claimants free of charge. Eligible recipients must also meet, as I've said, an identity standard, which means that they must have self-identified as Black, African American, Afro-American, or Negro at least 12 years prior to the establishment of a reparations study commission or a reparations program, whichever comes first. Both criteria must be met for eligibility. So that's the first pillar. The second is that Black redress would bring Black wealth up to a level comparable to those held by whites. The racial wealth gap is a product of national policies that promoted white wealth accumulation and the decumulation of Black wealth. So as a consequence, that should be the target for a reparations program. Kirsten and I like to say that the racial wealth gap is the premier economic indicator of the cumulative intergenerational effects of white supremacy in the United States. The third pillar is the requirement that true reparations involve direct payments to eligible recipients. And this is how countless groups have been remunerated for the atrocities that they have experienced. Germany continues to make payments to victims of the Holocaust, and the US government has made restitution to Japanese Americans who were subjected to mass incarceration during World War II in the form of monetary payments. More recently, the US government paid reparations to Americans whose suffering was caused by other nations. The families that lost loved ones in the 9/11 terrorist attacks received grants from the US government averaging $2 million, with some as high as $7 million. And each of the Americans who was held hostage in the US Embassy in Tehran in 1979 to 1980 was paid $10,000 per day of captivity, or about $4.4 million each.
And then finally, the federal government is the culpable party and must pay the debt. And from here to equality, reparations for Black Americans in the 21st century, we argue the federal government gave itself the right and the authority to enslave Black people and to institute nearly a century of legal segregation. It also sanctioned or turned a blind eye to nearly 100 white terror campaigns, during which the wealth gap was aggravated by the seizure and appropriation of Black property by white terrorists, frequently the very folks who had led those campaigns in the first place. In fact, the federal government is the only entity with the capacity to pay the debt. So we're going to talk about some of the detours from reparations that are very much being discussed and employed. And one chief among those is HR 40. But HR 40 is truly an unfortunate detour from a national reparations plan. It has been revised several times, most recently during the 2021 House Judiciary Subcommittee's markup session with disastrous results. We cannot provide a full account here, but the following issues are critical. First of all, the commission, this reparations commission that would be provided for through HR 40 would be exempt from the Federal Advisory Committee Act. So this is legislation that ensures that all commission members engage in transparent deliberations, that they hold hearings and public meetings, that they publish their agendas and provide periodic reports on their activities prior to the delivery of a final recommendation. This commission has asked to be exempt from those requirements. Narcan and Cobra rewrote the bill to provide commission members, now numbering 15, up from 7 in the original legislation, with pay at a daily rate of up to Executive 4 level on the federal scale, currently $173,000 per annum, or $253 over the course $253,000 over the course of the 18-month timeline. Commissions of this type should be reimbursed for their expenses, and certainly their administrative staff should be paid, should be salaried, but it is inappropriate for the members themselves to receive pay. We believe this to be a sacred mission, and it is not one that should be associated with the commission members themselves receiving salaries. Curiously, a quorum can be established with 6 members, so only 6 members, not a supermajority, not even a majority. In a very odd internal process, the administrative director of the commission, who will be appointed by the chair and the vice chair, has the authority to select 6 members, quote, from the major civil society and reparations organizations that have historically championed the cause of reparatory justice, end quote, most likely Narcan and Cobra. It's important to know these organizations oppose direct payments to eligible recipients. They also advocate the creation of a national trust authority to manage reparations funds. So unlike reparations payments that have been made around the world directly to those individuals, Narcan and Cobra, through their influence over this bill, have instituted that a separate entity would manage the funds for the eligible recipients. No elected official or public employee, individuals who would be accountable to the public, may serve. In fact, federal law prohibits such individuals from receiving payments. It appears the current bill ensures that every member will be eligible to receive a salary. It's not, you wonder, if they had spent as much time in the rewrite, focusing on how best to deliver reparations to the eligible recipients, and less time to how to guarantee significant salaries for the commission members, this might be some legislation that one could actually get behind, but that is not what happened. But we should be concerned about commission members who will serve only if they are handsomely paid.
So let me add that there are some substantive weaknesses that accompany the structural flaws that Kirsten just talked about with HR 40. And the substantive weaknesses involve the fact that there's no directive that's given to the commission about what the parameters must be of the proposals that they bring forward to Congress. And so we mentioned 4 pillars of a comprehensive reparations plan. Well, none of those 4 pillars are designated as items that must be built into the proposals that Congress receives from this commission. And so as a consequence, the commission has a completely free hand in terms of deciding what would constitute reparations. It could decide that another apology would be sufficient, or it could decide that an Evanston type of program could be replicated on a national scale, and that would constitute adequate reparations. We don't know. We do know that Narcan and Cobra oppose the provision of funds to eligible recipients on a direct basis. And we also know that they have a notion of eligibility for reparations that is inclusive of individuals whose ancestors were not enslaved in the United States. And so we're very nervous about the formation of a commission that would be heavily influenced by their perspective. In addition, there has been a groundswell of piecemeal plans, mislabeled reparations, that are diverting energy from the more difficult task of pursuing a comprehensive national program. So cities like Evanston, Illinois, which I just mentioned, passed a housing voucher program that provides $25,000 grants for families to undertake home repairs, maintenance, or purchase a new home. And these are Black families, presumably, that were subjected to discrimination in the Evanston housing market between 1919 and 1969. The total amount budgeted for the funds is $10 million, and this is pitifully low, even for a housing voucher program. In fact, thus far, only $400,000 have been raised to date from a cannabis tax, which means only 16 grants are available. And the allocation of those 16 grants, which are paid to the local banks who were responsible for the discriminatory activities in the first place, and not paid directly to the eligible recipients. The recipients of those 16 grants will be determined by a lottery. States and municipalities in general do not have adequate resources to eliminate the racial wealth gap for their residents who are Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. The bill that we mentioned totals $14 trillion in 2019 dollars. That's the minimum figure that would be required to eliminate the racial wealth gap. At the same time, the combined budgets of all states and municipalities were less than $3.5 trillion, about 1/4 of what was needed. And if the states and municipalities devoted all of their funds to a reparations project, they could not conduct any of their services that they're supposed to provide for their constituencies. Our preference always has been for state and local initiatives to be referred to as racial equity initiatives rather than as reparations. But insofar as some states and cities have established commissions that they refer to as reparations projects, we've begun to give deep thought to what these programs might look like. We highlight two objectives. First, these commissions actually can encourage their states or municipalities to actively lobby and petition Congress for a comprehensive national reparations program. And second, they can address harms and atrocities unique and specific to their locales. Now, this is an important task, is identifying which atrocities are really unique and specific to particular states or to particular cities. But that should be the foundation for any type of project of redress that's going to be conducted at the state or local level.
All right. So we'd like to shift just briefly to talk about Juneteenth, now a national holiday. In fact, some of you may have learned about Opal Rowland, the woman from Texas who, during Obama's administration, walked from Texas to the White House in an effort to convince him and the world, really, that Juneteenth should be a holiday, was my third grade teacher in Fort Worth, Texas. So I had some definite connections to this effort. But now a national holiday, Juneteenth, the 19th of June, 1865, refers to the prolongation of enslavement that was imposed upon Black people in Texas. People mistakenly say it was 2 years after emancipation. However, this is an inaccurate description. The Emancipation Proclamation did not effectively free the slaves who were under Confederate control. And Texas absolutely was under Confederate control. This only happened after the war. But many people are disturbed by the commercialization of Juneteenth, that it's become just another ballyhooed shopping weekend, complete with stereotypical images of Black people gleefully toasting their freedom with items like Walmart's, quote, celebration edition Juneteenth ice cream. So the label and the red velvet flavored dessert read, quote, the label on the ice cream, share and celebrate African American culture, emancipation, and enduring hope, end quote. The product has been pulled from their stores. This is just another purely symbolic gesture towards the Black community. It would be a different world if Juneteenth was declared a national holiday in conjunction with the launching of a national reparations plan. That would have been a response. That would have been the response if Walmart had been. What would the response have been? What would our response have been if Walmart had elected to lead the charge for a national campaign? Pushing onto TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and taking out full-page ads in newspapers and magazines across the country and the world advocating for redress for Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. That would be a cause worthy of celebration. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be glad to try to have a conversation now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was amazing. So, let me go through a few questions because you guys said a lot, and I'm taking it back. One thing I just want to acknowledge that you slipped in, Dr. Kirsten Mullen, that you were taught in Fort Worth, Texas. And like, but literally, like that connection is amazing. I don't think that's an accident. You know what I mean? Like, that's an accident.
She has lots of secrets.
Yeah, you said your third grade teacher. That's amazing. She just like slipped that in. She's like, by the way, you know what I mean? That's amazing. So, Opal, I saw.
Yeah, Opal Roland Lee. She was Opal Roland when she was my teacher.
Inspiring.
And she's still going strong.
Yeah,
she's still going
strong.
Yeah.
She's still going. She's amazing.
They're calling her the grandmother of Juneteenth.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. The grandmother of Juneteenth. She's amazing. She put in the work, made that happen. Oh my God, it's amazing. So, that connection again is not an accident. That was your third grade teacher in Fort Worth, Texas. Everyone, take note of that. So, okay. So I'm gonna try to go through all these questions. So, starting with let's see, genealogy. So, in terms of your recommendations, who qualifies for reparations? I know you talk about you have to have one ancestor who's descendant from essentially freedmen before the 1870 census or 1860 census or prior. And then you talk about needing to be in the have declared Black in the census for at least 12 years, right? So if there's anything you want to add to that, what do you think qualifies for? Who qualifies for reparations in your opinion?
I mean, those are the criteria, but both conditions would need to be met.
Yeah.
The individuals who are descended from at least one person who was enslaved in the United States, but also who for at least 12 years prior to the creation of a reparations initiative, a reparations program, or the enactment of a reparations commission, self-identified as Black, African-American, Afro-American, or Negro.
Yeah, the first condition, the lineage standard, is supposed to connect the individual to the persons who should have received the 40-acre land grants, which is the foundation for the debt that the federal government owes Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. And the second condition is to ensure that we don't have people who suddenly jump Black at the point at which there's an opportunity to receive a debt payment from the federal government. And so we want to be sure that the people who are eligible are individuals who not only are persons who are descendants of the folks who were enslaved in the United States, but also individuals who are living their lives as Black people. And so that's why we have those two conditions.
Thank you for adding that. That was great. So in terms of the racial wealth gap, what do you think? Why is the racial wealth gap significant at all? Why should it be a focus, a North Star in terms of what should be thought about in terms of reparations and healing freedmen?
Well, Sandy mentioned, that the racial wealth gap dates back to the point when the newly emancipated Black people were promised and then denied those 40-acre land grants. This is an asset that would have made a tremendous difference in their lives and in the lives of their descendants. This is property that they could have lived on, that they could have sold, they could have partitioned, they could have borrowed against it to build a business, to send their children to college debt-free. But most importantly, it's an asset that they could have willed to their progeny, willed to their children. We know that wealth is not so much what an individual is able to accumulate, but what one inherits. And when you think about white Americans and also new immigrants to the United States in the 1860s, who did receive land grants through the Homestead Act of 1862. These are white people who were given not 40 acres, but 160 acres of land. And they did accumulate wealth over those generations. And so this is an opportunity in wealth and asset accumulation that white Americans were given by the federal government that Black Americans were denied. So we're talking first about the creation of the racial wealth gap, which is truly a product of the federal government, and its continuation to the present. But when you look at what was denied Black people, and you bring that forward to the current time, we see this as the most it's like the most perfect indicator of that white supremacy and racism in the United States.
Yeah, the wealth gap is capturing sharp differences in the degree of economic security and opportunity that is possessed by Black and white Americans. It's really quite disturbing when we think about the extent to which Black Americans have been deprived of the material conditions for full citizenship. And the material conditions for full citizenship are best captured by the level of wealth that households possess. And so we argue that should be the focal point. We are not too touchy-feely. Okay, so we're not as concerned about, psycho-emotional trauma or healing circles. We certainly think that if individuals who receive reparations payments have a need for psychological counseling, mental health services, they could use part of their funds for that purpose. But we think that in all contexts in which acts of reparative justice have been conducted for victimized communities, the primary form of redress has been a monetary payment, not the provision of some other type of service, so that individuals who receive the funds have full discretion over how they might be used. And so that's central to the way in which we think about this issue. If you want to form a healing circle now or after the receipt of reparations, fine. That's your choice. But it's not necessarily something that the federal government should give you. What the federal government should give you is the opportunity to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we touched just briefly, on some of the reparations payments that have been made around the world in the past. Certainly in the case of the victims of the Holocaust, Germany and others made those payments directly to the individuals who were affected by it and their heirs. And when you look at the United States, which unjustly incarcerated Japanese Americans during World War II, the United States government eventually, in addition to an apology, made uniform payments to all of those victims. And even in cases where the United States was not at fault, and I'm thinking here of 9/11, but also, as Sandy mentioned, in the case of the Americans who had held hostage in Tehran, direct payments were made to those individual victims. And so we say, well, why should things be any different in this instance when the potential claimants are Black American descendants of U.S. slavery?
Oh my goodness, that was amazing! Oh my God. So this segues perfectly into the.
Well, I'm not sure what was amazing about that, but that's what we said.
No, what you said was amazing, not what happened. Let's be clear. But in terms of the definition of genocide, and in terms of the definition of reparation by the UN, what you said is exactly on point. That's why it's amazing. Sorry, I just want to be clear. I always say, I'm like, oh my God, we need to know about genocide. It's great. You know what I mean?
Well, let me insert a comment here.
Yeah, go for
which
it.
is, it's really important to look carefully at the UN's definition of genocide, because people frequently think that what genocide means is just extermination of individuals. But it could mean the extermination of their culture. It could mean attempts to reduce their birth rate. It could mean constraining their lives in ways in which other members of a society are not constrained. And so the UN has a very broad definition of genocide. And so I think there's no question that what has happened to Black Americans over the centuries, particularly from the point at which the nation comes into existence as a slave republic, constitutes genocidal practices.
I certainly agree with that. And I'm going to pull up the definition of genocide really quick to read through just for the audience. I know, obviously, y'all know what I'm about to bring up. So it says, Article 2, Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. A, killing members of the group, like you mentioned. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, like you mentioned. E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Mm-hmm. So what's amazing about that, not only did you mention that, in the California Reparations report, and we mentioned this as well. I'll just go through the points really quickly, but in the California Reparations report, they mention they mention kids being taken from freedmen at higher rates than any other race or any other ethnicity. So even though we're at less risk of harming our children, our kids are taken from us at higher rates than any other race. And white people, Europeans who have higher rates of risk, do not have their kids taken at higher rates.
That's right.
So that was in the California Reparations report, and that is E, the definition. And you only need to qualify for one definition of genocide. You don't have to qualify, unfortunately, for all of them, which we do. You only have to qualify for one of them. Yeah. And we, at that minimum, that the California Reparations report talks about our kids being taken from us at higher rates. We put out a tweet in May, and we said, just in modern day times, contemporary times, going through the definitions of genocide. A, killing members of the group. We make up the highest percentage of deaths by population, and not only law enforcement, but also hate crimes. With B,
well, also mortality that's health related.
Yes,
yes. There's a measure that the population demographers use that they call excess mortality, and our community has the highest rate of excess mortality across the United States, perhaps with the exception of Native Americans,
I think. Yep.
But both of those communities have extremely high rates of excess mortality.
Yes, no, that's a great example. Now, B, they said causing serious bodily injury, bodily or mental harm to members of the group. That I put that under mass incarceration in the jail and prison system. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. We put apartheid in schools and housing and in food. D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. We make up the highest percentages of abortions by percentage of populations and in total, as well as maternal deaths. So whether you're giving birth or trying to take a life, you have the highest percentage as a mother of potentially dying. Mm-hmm. And then E, forcibly transferring children from one group to another. We mentioned about the foster care system, the child welfare system.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely. I'm really glad to hear you highlighting these aspects of the commission report. I mean, we think it's probably the most significant document of its kind since the publication of the findings of the Warren Commission. The Kerner Commission. Earl Warren was
different. That was the Kennedy assassination.
But yes, the Kerner Commission.
On urban unrest.
I mean, it's a bit of tough sledding because it's a really long document. But certainly if one begins with the executive summary, and then we would encourage people to read the sections that are most salient for you, but to really get a sense of the breadth and the depth of that report. It's really a remarkable achievement.
I think that commission, the Coroner Commission, was a really well written one, but it meant nothing in terms of enforcement or in terms of what it did.
That's because its recommendations were ignored.
Right, yeah, I mean the recommendations were sound.
Yeah,
and had they been followed,
it would have been
a very different
positive thing. Yeah,
and it remains to be seen what how the recommendations of this commission will be.
It remains to be seen what they are.
How they will be developed, and then what will be the consequence.
Yeah,
definitely. So, I want to ask a few more questions while we have you. And again, I'm really honored to have y'all. In terms of let's just speak. I just want to speak a little bit more on the Kerner Commission and the. What happened there, because you had a whole report. It talked about, like you said, good recommendations. I did a control find in that, and I searched for reparations. I didn't find a single dot in terms of that. And either way, when we understand what reparations means, we understand that the Kerner Commission literally said what happened actually in 1992 with the Rodney King riots. Mm-hmm. It said that potentially another explosion like that would happen again. And it happened in 1992 with the verdict of Rodney King in Los Angeles, right? And so if that preluded that type of response, if reparations is not done in terms of today, in terms of what is happening now with reparations, what is happening now in terms of even though the AB 3121 force is the first one and it made it lineage based, we still have to keep our eyes out and make sure that it goes the right way, because it doesn't mean that like no one will try to usurp it and make it bad. So we have to keep our eyes on it as the grassroots, as the community. But in terms of what we think that will mean in terms of today, what will the current commission, what will AB 3121, what will the recommendations mean today? If they make them next year, July 1st, 2023, let's say they make them, let's say they pay the reparations, lineage based. What will that do? And what potentially can it be? And how will it potentially influence the national reparations?
So there's a lot here to talk about. You put a lot of things on the table, Eric. So first, I want to say the recommendations that the Kerner Commission made were not what President Lyndon Johnson's expected. He loaded that commission with very conservative business community people, CEOs of some of the largest corporations in the country. But what he did not expect, what he could not have imagined, is that someone had the idea to have the commission members to tour a number of Black communities across the country. And they were radicalized in the process. What they saw was pretty straightforward. And they put the blame where it should be, at the feet of white supremacist America. Now, LBJ did not seem at all inclined to follow the recommendations, but perhaps even more importantly, not long after the commission report was published, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and a whole new round of riots took place, and the recommendations of the Kerner Commission were just completely forgotten. They were just shelved. So you're asking about, what happened today, if somehow the state of California were able to pay reparations to the community of eligibility. So, one would have to ask, first of all, how is that possible? I mean, the state of California does not have the capacity to pay reparations to all of the Black Americans of U.S. slavery who are in the state.
Well, not in an amount sufficient to eliminate the racial wealth gap for them. Not even close.
Not even close. I mean, I don't remember what the figures are. I mean, I want to say that the
Well, I think we estimated that depending on how large your eligible community is, it would take at least $600 to $800 billion. Right. And the state's budget is closer to $270 billion.
So they don't have the ability to cover that debt.
I mean, they could make partial payments
over some period of time.
But then that raises the question, and this is the question that I think we have to address as a community. What's the minimum amount we would settle for? Because if you have a series of these local reparations projects where there's some forms of payment that are made, it's impossible for it to be in an amount that would match the total that's required to eliminate the racial wealth gap. So what is it people would settle for? Because I think once you have this series of piecemeal approaches across the country, it will be virtually impossible to have a national program. The opponents of reparations will say, you've already got it. And it won't matter to them that the amounts are not the amounts that are merited.
Okay, I think you guys said a lot, so I do want to do a little pushback. What do you think? Let's say reparations can be done lineage based, and in terms of states, not every state, California, states that have a certain amount of budget, and then certain states that have a few amount of freedmen, generally are able to kind of meet this. At least
Utah.
Yeah, Utah could. And right. It would still take one third
of their budget.
It would take 1/3 of Utah's budget, as small as the Black population is there. So no, this is
it's not going to happen.
This is a fantasy. I mean, the numbers don't work.
I'm not saying the numbers will work, but here's what I'm saying. Let's say, because I go back to the UN definition of reparation, which talks about if a state does reparation, it can be compensated for that reparations once the federal does it, right?
Yeah, once the federal government does it. I would think if I was a state government, I'd be reluctant to do it if there was no federal program in place to ensure that the offset would be forthcoming. But, you can take your chances.
And California is the only state that took its chances, right?
Well,
no, there are others that are coming online.
And California has not specified precisely what its plan will look like yet. There are some tentative suggestions in the interim report, but the interim report is primarily a report about the atrocities that justify reparations, both nationally and in the state of California. It is not a report that is providing the task force's final recommendations. So I think we have to, to wait to see what those recommendations are to have a better sense of what the potential consequences will be. And then, of course, there is a task force that has been authorized, I believe, in New York State, which is highly problematic. Because it would literally be under the direct control of Narcan and Cobra, since they have in the existing legislation the authority to appoint most of the members of the commission. So I think we've got to be vigilant and careful going forward. And I think we have hit our time limit. Have we not?
Yes, we have.
Yeah. Okay. But we want to say thank you. Go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
The Q&A, right? So that was 45 minutes or 30 minutes. Oh, wait. Oh, no, actually, that is the Q&A. Yeah. Thank you for coming. I appreciate y'all.
Thanks for having us.
And Dr. William Sandy Darity, thank you so much for coming and spending your Father's Day and Juneteenth with us for as much as you can. It means so much to us, so much to the grassroots. And we wish you the best. We wish y'all so much good blessings. And thank you so much for coming with us.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Towards reparations.
Yeah, reparations now. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.